So, first of all, Mr. Barnier. Mr. Barnier, I was very surprised when you said we have to explain better to the people what do we have to do, where we are going, and how we want to reach our goal. So can you be more specific on this? What the EU should do and what national government should do on this? And do you think that, I'm concerned of a little blame game which is in course right now in national government, saying it's not my fault, it's the past. Do you think this is correct to say? Second question, and then I close, it's about banks. We have heard from Professor Eichinger, I think, saying we have to recapitalize immediately the European banks. This is not the EBA regulations. We are talking about Basel III and the possibility of reaching an agreement at the next meeting of ECOFIN.
Je suis surpris que vous soyez surpris. Parce que quand on regarde les élections, en Grèce, en France, même au Royaume-Uni, on voit bien qu'il y a cette fracture ou cette divergence entre les citoyens et le projet européen. Vous dites la tentation des gouvernements nationaux, c'est de dire c'est la faute de Bruxelles. C'est pas nouveau, hein. Moi, je pense que tous les hommes politiques, j'ai cité les sensibilités, libéraux, verts, gauche, droite, centre, qui croient au projet européen, doivent aujourd'hui assumer et expliquer non seulement ce qu'ils font dans leur pays, puisque ici comme ailleurs, chaque gouvernement prend des mesures difficiles qui exigent un débat, une explication, mais aussi expliquer ce qu'ils font ensemble à Bruxelles. Bruxelles, mesdames et messieurs, bien sûr c'est la Commission, en tant que gardienne des traités et porteur de propositions, mais Bruxelles c'est le Parlement européen et c'est le Conseil des ministres et les chefs d'État qui se réunissent. Et je pense que dans chaque pays, en tout cas dans le mien, j'ai trop vu depuis 30 ans qu'on était à Bruxelles, qu'on décidait à Bruxelles, sans expliquer ensuite quand on revient. Donc le défi démocratique que j'ai évoqué, il exige un effort de tout le monde. Je pense aussi, je le redis, qu'il faut remettre de la démocratie au sommet, de l'unité au sommet, en créant ce poste de président de l'Union européenne et remettre de la démocratie par en bas à travers le débat citoyen. Sur les banques, depuis le début de la crise, le mouvement de capitalisation a commencé. 400 milliards ont été mobilisés par les banques européennes pour se capitaliser. Et l'effort qui est devant elles et qui est engagé, il est à peu près de 400 milliards à nouveau, avec les règles de Bâle que nous mettons en œuvre. Je veux simplement rappeler, mesdames et messieurs, que les règles de Bâle, à travers la proposition que j'ai faite au ministre des Finances et qui en ont débattu la semaine dernière, je pense qu'un accord est bientôt probable, concerne 8300 banques, dans une très grande diversité de statuts. Il y a ici, comme ailleurs, des banques coopératives, des banques mutualistes. Et je dois faire attention à ce que ces banques font pour l'économie. C'est d'ailleurs pour ça que j'ai dit au président de la Banque centrale européenne, comme au président de l'autorité européenne des banques, que je serais intéressé de savoir ce que les 8000 banques européennes ont fait avec les 1000 milliards qui ont été prêtés récemment, depuis quelques mois, par la Banque centrale européenne. Quelle est la proportion de cet argent qui est allé vers l'économie réelle? Voilà. Donc, je veux dire à notre collègue américain qui est ici que nous avons engagé ce mouvement de capitalisation en puissance et en profondeur. J'aimerais simplement que les Américains fassent la même chose.
I would like to also to answer to Professor Eichinger, because even though I share his opinion that there is something lacking actually in the institutions which to face the banking, the insufficient capitalization of the banks. I agree with that. I think that we probably should, even though there has been a lot of actions of the European institutions. I agree with Michel. But I think that in 2009, we probably should have created some kind of a resolution institution at the European level and a bailout fund at the European level for the banks. And that would have helped very much for the resolution of the Irish crisis. Probably it would have avoided the Irish to enter into the assistance European mechanism. And it would help very much, actually, the Spanish banking sector if we had these kind of institutions. So I agree with Professor Eichengreen. But for the time being, we don't have this institution. And I would appreciate that we go in this direction. But for the time being, I insist that the fact that without this institution, we force the bank to recapitalize at a speed which is much more rapid than the Basel III agreement, has put the banking sector in jeopardy. And the banking sector decreased its loans, and it has been one of the causes of the deepening of the economic crisis, because the loans to the economy in the European economies have decreased since late last year. So I think that we should not forget to see the priorities, and the priority today is to alleviate the pressure which is put on the banking sector in Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Van der Riem. But I have just a question for you. In 2006, you wrote the problem about the treaty. The problem does not lie in the criteria or in the rules, and above all, with the member state ownership of fiscal discipline. The article was quoted was why we should renationalize the Stability Pact. I don't know if you remember, it was your article, your study. And you said that we should renationalize fiscal policies. Do you think that the fiscal compact has reached this goal? I mean, is effective in prevent explosion of budget deficits in Europe?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I think that when I wrote that we should nationalize fiscal policies, it is because at that time I thought, and I still think, that we need the countries to have a real appropriation of the goals of fiscal rectitude, and we needed the crisis. We needed the increase in spreads in Greece, for example, to push the countries to go towards fiscal rectitude. So I think that it is still the case today. Today, what we need, and I am glad to say that in front of Mario Monti, because Mario Monti is exactly doing that in Italy. But we need, in all the countries in Europe, that the governments appropriate for themselves the goals of coming back to their fiscal equilibrium. And I say that also for my country.
Thank you. Professor Eichengreen, I want to ask you the same question. I read the paper from Martin Feldstein, who was completely negative on the fiscal compact. He said this is totally ineffective, it's not going to prevent budget deficits, it's impossible to apply in Europe, and at the end he said, market is going to be the sovereign bond police for Europe, not the fiscal compact treaty. Do you agree with this?
I think if Europe relies on the markets to be the sovereign debt police, Europe will be in trouble. We've learned that police force can fall asleep for extended periods. So I don't think relying exclusively on the market is a solution. Nor am I confident about ability to rely on the institutions of the European Union. At the end of the day, fiscal discipline has to be grown at home. I think one of the positive aspects of the new fiscal compact is the idea that aspects of it will have to be embodied in national constitutions and national institutions, that more countries will move toward national fiscal councils, more countries will move toward greater budgetary transparency, more countries will move in the direction of giving the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister more agenda-setting power and veto power over the national budget. At the end of the day, I think there will be progress.
I have another very short questions. One of the issues when we talk about bank reforms right now, it's about not just liquidity or capital ratios. It's about the valuation of sovereign debt. Italy, for example, is very negative on the Danish proposal, saying that we have to market every sovereign bond, and then we have to, make our calculations on the capital requirements. Do you think it's a good position to say, no, we are not to mark the market of sovereign bond?
I think that marking to market on a daily basis is risky because the markets get it wrong on a daily basis. Having a zero risk weight for sovereign debt, on the other hand, is even more wrong. So marking to market on the basis of some kind of trailing average or something like along those lines would be a sensible compromise.
Thank you. I want your opinion on this. And second, about bank reforms and these issues. And second, policymakers are facing many quandaries in their efforts to pursue short-term recovery and long-term stability. Each as an analogy from the Great Depression. That's what you said recently. What's the analogy with the Great Depression in this crisis?
So, first of all, on the bank issue, I think the problem is really intellectually very clear, that you need some European level solution to this, a European level resolution mechanism. But it's inherently linked with the question of where the fiscal capacity for this comes from, because that was at the beginning exactly the discussion. It would, with a single capital market, be a good idea to have a bank supervision system. But then you would ultimately have the question, if there's a need for a fiscal bailout, who provides those resources? And with a budget that is just over 1% of GDP, it's difficult to see the European Union as doing that. And so it's really only credible if you link it to some kind of mechanism that gives the European Union the resources that back it. And one way of doing that is to say joint and several liability of the member states. But another way of doing it, and I think in the end a more constructive way, is to actually allocate some sort of specific revenue. With Alexander Hamilton, it was the customs revenues that went to the United States rather than to the state of New Jersey or the state of New York. And I would think that you could make a start with something like customs revenues, but you may also think of a share of VAT as a way of doing this and of Europeanizing some part of the fiscal issue. The Great Depression analogy is very, very often raised, and with the levels of unemployment in Spain with nearly 25% unemployment and 50% youth unemployment, it obviously looks very, very much like the Great Depression. And many people then say immediately, well, we know from the work of Jeffrey Sachs and Barry Eichengreen, we know from the work of Ben Bernanke that the way of getting out of the Great Depression was to get off the gold standard, and the equivalent of the gold standard is the euro, so that this becomes a very, very powerful argument. And that's exactly why I was trying to think of ways of flexibilizing the euro, because it seems to me that this is such an achievement, and it's so central to the European project that it's really difficult, I mean actually impossible, to abandon it without abandoning the European project altogether. But what you need is the flexibility that the gold standard didn't have, and that we really find very, very difficult in terms of real wage adjustment at the moment.
I'm going to be, hello? Yeah, I'm going to be very fast. I mean, you're an expert on history of international affairs. Based on your experience, is it possible to think about any precedent in history of breaking up a monetary union? Something that you can say, okay, my example, if the Greece want to exit the euro, of the Europe decides, ECB or the European Union decides that Greece is not fit to be in the euro. What experience, where we can look to have an idea what's going to happen?
Technically, it's really not that difficult in that there are precedents for this. At the beginning of the 1990s, when the post-Soviet states, or even before the breakup of the Soviet Union, when different republics were wondering about the stability of the ruble zone and whether the ruble zone wasn't working in an unfair way, they took out of the archives all the plans for breaking up the Austro-Hungarian monetary union after the First World War. So technically, I think you really needn't worry about that. But what you do need to worry about are the political situations and the political framework. It's a much more political issue than it is a technical economic one. In terms of the technical economics, it would have to be associated with radical limitations on capital movements at the moment that it's imposed.
Thank you. Professor Eichengreen, you want to reply to something?
I want to disagree with Harold a little bit on that one. All the breakups of monetary unions we have in history are cases where the countries in question had no functioning banking systems, as well as comprehensive capital controls. The former Soviet Union, various cases after World War I. Europe today is a very different place. There is no informative historical precedent, in my view, for breaking up the euro area.
It's a one-way journey. Mr. Montezemolo, what do you think, I mean, the state of relations and the quality of relations between Europe and Italy? We have a very troubled past. I mean, is something changing?
I would like to invite all of you to wait for 3 hours answer, because it's a difficult it's a very difficult question. Anyway, to make the story shorter, I think that in the recent years, Italy has been too far from Europe in terms of physical and political presence, and in terms of political and cultural debate inside the country. Having said that, Italy has been for sure between a country with the highest level of Europeanism. But in my opinion, Europeanism, our culture was strong European culture, but I can say religious one. In other words, now I think that the economic crisis, that in our country is not only economic crisis, is also a very, very strong social crisis. I've never seen since after the war such a difficult social situation, very difficult. And this crisis and the risk of a national decline may cast Italy in a strong anti-European attitude. This is something that we have to face very, very carefully. In Italy, too, Europe must become a subject for real, pragmatic and no longer religious discussion. And again, to fight the risk of an Italian anti-Europe culture, we must recover the sense of our national interest. I said before, we need more Italy in Europe and more Europe in Italy in our national interest. That is, national interest means European interest and national interest. Because pro-European rhetoric is not enough. What we need is a discussion about how Italy can remain in Europe, defending its own interest, its own reasons, which are those of integration, but also the promotion of our economy. There is clear a need for a new patriotism. Let me put it this way. Our Italian patriotism based on pride in building Italy, a European style of patriotism, but belonging to the citizen and to our capacity to return to the front line, even in Europe. Last but not least, today in Italy, really, the consensus on Europe risks falling victim to a destructive popular reaction based on growing pockets of social affliction that the crisis has derived, but unable to provide to constructive answers. So my suggestion is to transfer a religious discussion in more really pragmatic discussion with constructive answer, again, hoping, as thanks to Mario Monti, we are doing a far strong presence in Europe, but even a stronger cultural, European culture inside the country.
Thank you. Well, the session is over, the panel is over. I want to thank you for being with us with this panel. So what we understand is that, you know, the euro is not a revolving door. And as Mao said, there is a big confusion under the sky, so it is a good day. And let's hope for everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay, we now move to the last part of the morning. So I have the pleasure and the honor to call the Prime Minister, Mr. Monti, on the podium to give his keynote speech. He will be talking for about 20-25 minutes, and at the end there will be a short chance for a few questions to him. So please.